as one of the coordinators for the major group of children and youth, we've seen much more interest from youth to participate in this forum compared to previous years, and looking in relation to other forums on sustainable development, we've seen an increasing interest from our delegates. And I've received many messages from youth delegations around the world, from India, from Australia, expressing their interest in how they could participate in this forum, and even contributing online.
Yeah. Dr. Narona, you've been in Nairobi, what, like 3 minutes or something?
About 3 weeks, I think. No, I've been here 10 days, yeah.
Your thoughts on UNEA. What does it mean to you, being the boss of DTIE, whatever that means? But, you know, we'll talk about that later. What does it mean to you?
Well, forget about being the boss. Just ask me, what do I feel about UNEA? I think that's more fun. I think it's a terrific historical moment because it's the first time that you're going to have an environment. You have an environmental assembly, you have people here, you have people from all of the countries of the world, 160 represented here, and that gives environment a huge voice. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. And from being here, what is amazing is the kind of involvement you see of people in all of the side events, in the discussions, in all of the cow sessions, and you see an active engagement of people. And you know, environment has certainly become center stage, and we just hope it's going to become more center stage in countries, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Excellent. Farouk, before they cart you off and do a security check on you, your thoughts?
Well, I think that it's been interesting, and we actually had to have a game going about how many times we hear the phrase either historic or monumental event. I lost count at around 20, but I'm sure it's going to be many more before the week is through. And yes, it's become a cliche, but things are cliches for a good reason, because they're true. And I think it really, really, truly is an historic moment, not least because you have to understand what this is, which is the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is essentially putting it on par with the General Assembly, but for environmental issues. And what else what I've been struck by in this week is how the interlinkages are becoming clear. Yes, it's an environment assembly, but it's not about just the environment anymore. We were talking earlier, of course, and we understand that, you know, one of the themes is wildlife trade, and what drives these things, and what is the cause of them. And it comes down to, of course, the consumption patterns and behavior and demand of the markets overseas. And that becomes an SEP type issue. And of course, then we link to the rule of law, which is how you might begin to enforce some of these things. So all of a sudden, you've now got a very, very deep sustainable development paradigm shaping up in the theme of UNEA. And that's really exciting. I mean, I can really see how these policy issues are coming together, and it's a much different dynamic than just we talk about environmental protection only.
No doubt, no doubt. Okay.
Let me say that I've been coming to the UNEP in warmer months for many years for the Governing Council. And although I'm not a person who sees the world as being a glass half full, I wasn't so sure. I didn't really connect to the historic or the magical moment, whatever. But actually, and I've only been here for 2 days, what I think is working, and maybe it will be really seen as historic, is finally there are people here who don't usually come. Not only the extra countries, that's great, and that room can more or less hold all of us, but different walks of life. People, not only the environment people, and that I'm only an environment person in my present job, but we've got to talk to other parts of society. So to have had, and I know my friend Antonio will talk about that, to have had all these distinguished legal persons who would have never come to a UNEP Governing Council before. I spoke with to a group of gender experts yesterday. I think many of them hadn't come here before. The youth, apparently a great civil society weekend, I wasn't here. If that really works and gels into some action after this meeting, it will probably be historic, but let's wait until we're sure about that. So far, so good.
All right. Justice?
Well, I think Julia already pointed out to a very important aspect of what we are doing here, which is we are really celebrating inclusion. I have been using for many years the term, in respect to environmental protection, unorthodox actors. Because UNEP and the environment organizations have always focused on the orthodox actors, states, NGOs, and now we see this great diversity, UNEP embracing everybody, including judges. So for us, is a challenge because, first of all, as part of the legal profession, we tend to think that law is the center of the universe. And judges are the center of the universe. So being here and having the opportunity to share our views, but also to listen outside the courtroom is an extraordinary experience in itself. And it gives us, from the Chief Justice that we had here, to the Senior Justice, to members of Attorney General's office, for all of us, it's a humble experience because you have to understand at the end of the day that you are just a small piece of a much broader and complex mosaic. So that's what I would say for the moment.
Excellent. Good opening session, folks. I appreciate that. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, Achim Steiner. He's in the house. Achim, welcome. Looks like after you came on my show, everyone wants a piece of you, huh? It's good to see. And also UNEA President, newly installed, if you will, the Minister Oyun Sanja-Soren. Round of applause, if you will. So Farouk, let me begin with you, if I may. So, talking about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, coming on the heels of MDGs, okay, Millennium Development Goals. So what difference will it make to have SDG goals and targets if, first of all, they are voluntary? Some MDGs, we know very well, didn't quite work out.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Jeff. I think it's a very fundamental question to understand, particularly for this assembly. The first and most obvious thing is that the SDGs, unlike the MDGs, will be universal in nature and global in application, which means that they will apply not only to the developing countries, but also to the developed countries, which of course leads us to understand, or needs us to understand, what implications that has for domestic policy in the so-called northern countries, which is a very profound undertaking. I mean, it's quite a large challenge, let's just put it that way. But more than that, of course, there are some other fundamental differences. Whilst the MDGs were quite a lot about social and poverty-based issues, this is going much broader and to include, of course, sustainable consumption and production, which, as Nathan and I are clearly spotting, our heart SEP badges. That is a big part of it, because it is about how individuals have a role in these things. And of course, we know one of the big drivers of poverty is environmental degradation, which of course is linked to the current unsustainable consumption and production patterns of much of the world. So again, you're trying to really link these things up. Another key aspect will be how we build in governance into all of this, which is the institutional frameworks underpinning the delivery of these SDGs, which is not something I think we did very well in the MDGs. A lot of the gains that were made were quite quickly lost because there wasn't that kind of institutional backup behind not only the delivery of these goals, but the maintenance of those, the progress that was made in many parts of the world. So, I mean, I could go on, but, you know, down to the target level, there's also some really good signs where, for example, in the poverty goal, you see a target on biodiversity and ecosystem protection. That is huge. I mean, for the first time, policymakers at the New York level are making the link between poverty issues and the need to protect the environment. But it hasn't gone far enough. We also still see a high degree of siloization. A lot of the targets on certain subjects are about social and economic issues, and there's not enough of mixing and matching, where you get the 3 dimensions of sustainable development read across the framework and embedded throughout the different goals. So there's still a lot of work to do, but it's heading in the right direction, and we really need now to push. And of course, this is why it's very important for UNEA. Things like SEP, where they have a very strong voice, we really need to pick that up and understand, how do you do SEP? I mean, this is a hard concept. It's about what people buy, what they wear, what they drive, what they watch, what they do. So you're telling people how to fundamentally change their lifestyles. It is about lifestyles.
Yeah.
And that's UNEA's role.
Sure. Julie, you want to say something?
So the SDGs, let's be honest about it. If we went out on the streets of Nairobi or Geneva or Paris, where I live, people would have no idea what we're talking about, even if we spelled it out. But if we need to explain this in a very clear way. This is really an effort by society, by decision makers at all levels, I hope, to try to map out a way that we can all of us, all 7.5 billion of us, going on 9 or more, can live in a dignified manner on this planet, which is our only home. I think it's very important to repeat what Farouk said, that this is about everybody. It's not pointing fingers to the so-called developing world. It's about everybody and everybody's responsibility. The biggest challenge now is to integrate the different, what we used to call pillars of sustainable development. Thank heavens that's gone. These are elements of sustainable development, the economic, the environmental, and the social. And some of us are also saying that governance, that is how we actually do it, should be a part of this, and there is a goal about that. I just want to say one thing about the goal, which is now in the draft, because many of us are pushing for it, about nature, about ecosystems and biodiversity. It's not only about these beautiful flowers. There isn't anybody who wouldn't understand that nature is our life support for every single one of us, more directly affecting poor people who actually don't have a supermarket where they buy their milk. So nature, while of course it has to be a goal in order to make sure that we remember it, but it also has to be integrated throughout the SDG system, as do all of the other issues. Governance, how are we going to do it? Poverty reduction, elimination totally. So it's a huge challenge, but the challenge for all of you, all of us, is to find a way to explain this to what used to be called the man on the street, but it's the human beings outside of these rooms.
Justice Antonio.
It seems to me that one of the reasons why the MDGs didn't go well, I'm not using the term failed, because it didn't fail entirely. There are areas in which we did, if not achieving the full goal, but we made huge progress, is to me the fact that perhaps we were not clever enough to build the legal framework for that. Of course, it's important that we understand that laws will never be able to get rid of poverty. You can write as many laws as you want, saying, I abolish poverty, or I'll give education to everybody, or labor. But law can help with the process and can ensure that something we say, we mean it. Because at the end of the day, perhaps the judge will be able to take that into consideration. And since we don't have international judges to deal with commitments, global commitments like that, we have to find ways in which we will be able to translate whatever is agreed at the international level into domestic legislation. Because once we do it, then at least the process is guaranteed that we might not achieve everything, but we will know exactly, as Julia said, the governance structure that will be needed in respect to things like public participation, just to mention, or transparency, or no corruption, or less corruption, because we all know, and it's important that we recognize the elephant that it's in the room. No, it's a big elephant. It's not one that we want to protect, which is corruption. So this is pervasive all over the world. There is not a single country that is not affected or touched by corruption. And the good thing about this meeting here and UNEP and the UN system for the past 10 years is that we can easily, freely talk about corruption and let people know that we are not going to achieve anything if we don't tackle with this issue.
Absolutely.
You said we should not have any secrets or in this conversation.
Absolutely.
And I'm bringing one that was a secret until recently under the carpet, and I'm delighted to see that we can freely speak about it.
Well done, well done. Okay, so let me ask you this, Dr. Leisure Norona. What of the goals and targets of the SDGs are transformational?
I guess the sustainable consumption production could be, because it actually goes through all of them, although we do have a standalone goal, and it's good that we have that. But if you really think about how it's working out, in every one of the current 17 goals, which I know are being reduced, if you look at the way in which you want to achieve that, whether it is the poverty eradication or whether it is industrialization or any one of those, in any one of those goals, if you could integrate sustainable consumption and production, you would be, in a way, thinking in terms of how to address environment, the 3 pillars that Julia mentioned. So that kind of an integration, one of the aspects of that integration would be through sustainable consumption production. The other one would be through looking at human well-being as running through these goals, because those link back to every indicator and every target that you have. So in terms of transformative goals, I would say that, of all the ones that we have, perhaps your sustainable consumption production would be the most important. It's not new, but it's central to the discussion and certainly central to what we are discussing at UNEA.
Yeah, Julie, I'll get back to you in a second, but let me ask Nguyen over there in the corner. Excuse me. Rio Plus 20 called for the establishment of an ombudsman, if you will, for the future, and your generation is no doubt the future. If that ombudsman was present, was currently here, maybe in this room, what would they think of the current draft?
That's very interesting in terms of our concepts of future generations and the future. When we think of the idea of future generations, often we refer to young people who, or generations who have not yet been born, who will then live on to be born in the future, and then be that generation who suffers the consequences of decision-making today. But we also need to think about that's not just children, young people, it's also people of your age who in 20, 30 years will become seniors, and you will also be affected.
I'm sorry, what was that? Thank you very much.
Just getting you back.
Good one.
Yes, these people are also more vulnerable to climate change, to heat waves, to disasters, and that, building on what the previous panelists have spoken, there definitely needs to be more ambition in the goals and targets, and the issue definitely is in the system. On consumption and production patterns, it's something that's anchored in the behavior of people, and that's something that needs to be transformed, needs to be changed, and that's something that's both part of the legal system, but also the educational system in reaching out to people's values.
Mm. Please feel free to contribute at this point, folks. Just, feel free. Put your hand up and press. Farouk, you want to say something?
Well, picking up actually on the 2 questions and combining them, one of the differences between the MDGs and the SDGs and how to make it transformational is the fact that the MDGs were very much about poverty eradication through economic growth. That was the underpinning paradigm, that if we lifted and we produced some kind of neoliberal type growth in all countries, we would resolve some of the problems. The paradigm has shifted now, and the SDGs is very much about the answer to poverty eradication is now through sustainable development. That in itself is transformative, but it's still very much rhetorical. And we need now, of course, to put that rhetoric into action, which is potentially the SDGs. And that political rhetoric is actually a huge shift when you think about where in 2007 we were in this game. We've got the president of South Africa saying sustainable development is dead because Johannesburg didn't really accomplish much on implementation, to Rio Plus 20 and now here, where sustainable development is all everyone talks about, which I'm delighted about as a sustainable development purist, not least because it gives me a job pretty much for the rest of my life, but because it is actually, I believe, the true answer. And we're seeing it. And again, talking about the integration of these 3 dimensions through policy and all of these things, it's happening. Can we now make it a true reality? That is the question. And that means it will be a transformation.
Sure. Sir, I'll get to you in a moment. Julia, you had something to say real quick.
Just simply that I think it's great that right now there are communities fighting for their goal. And frankly, IUCN is also fighting for a biodiversity nature goal. But at the end, I think what will be transformational, if it really can happen, is the integration of all of these things and reaching up and down in all parts of society, young and older, north and south, east and west. And I think if we can get ourselves out of our silos in which we are comfortable, let's face it, including the UN system and organizations like mine, and be committed to work together. So the integration should be the transformation. Once we stop fighting about the 17 or 15 or 20, and of course consumption is important, but so is every other goal in there. And then the second thing that should be transformational is that each goal, which is a high-level aspiration, will have targets which are actionable, where we have to be able to measure. Have we actually done this? And then the third thing is that it's about all of us. It's not pointing fingers at one part of the planet. So if this happens, it will be transformational.
Great. Okay. Sir, you had a question. Go ahead.
I just want to underscore one point, and that is, MDGs should not necessarily be seen as having actually failed to some extent because of a lack of a legal foundation or because of lack of clarity of its target. I think the MDGs actually had some actionable targets. Two problems, from my understanding, actually has to do with the problem associated with MDGs and in which we must avoid with the SDGs. And that is, one, the timeliness. If you time-bound a universal actually program and target, within 15, 20 years, and you don't back it with sustainable funding, because some of the key problems in many developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, with regards to the lack of realization of the MDG goals, was essentially lack of mobilization of resources, to make those targets actionable. So I believe strongly that we must avoid the pitfall of the MDGs realization progressively by ensuring that SDGs, have to some extent a strategic framework for resource mobilization, to make the targets that are actionable, realizable progressively. Thank you.
Well done. Good point. Ma'am, you go ahead real quick. Yep, and then we'll tackle that.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Yugratna Shrivastava from India, and I'm the representative of children and youth, Tunza for UNEP. So what is actually worrying me is, 5 years ago, I was at GA, and I had asked some questions which I feel are still unanswered to me. And the number one is, I wanted everybody here, all the government delegations, to get rid of the past. Whether MDGs happened, what went wrong, what did not went wrong, let's not have that in consideration when we talk about implementing the SDGs. I'm shocked that things come up that we might never get rid of poverty. We might never get rid of environmental degradation. Because for me, being a children, being a youth, 2100 is the year that I will live. For me, being a youth, it's not a technical detail whether the sea level will be 1 meter rise or 2 meter rise. It's a matter of my survival. I don't want that the discussions or the conclusions of SDGs should be just limited to a better governance structure. I want a better conclusion, a better implementation to the 7.5 billion people, estimated to 10 billion by 2030. And this is exactly the concern that I'm raising in. And of course, as the previous point was raised, we need a time-bound agreements. We cannot wait forever. There's a very famous quote that says, if all insects were to disappear within 30 years, all life forms would flourish. I'm sorry, I just misquoted it. It says if all insects were to disappear within the next 50 years, all life form would flourish, and if all, okay, I'm sorry again.
Take 3.
Yeah, I'll take a break. It says if all insects disappeared within the next 50 years, all life forms would end, and if all human beings disappeared between the next 30 years, all life forms would flourish. So this puts a big question mark in what direction are we heading into. And if you're framing something like SDGs and post-15 development agenda in a UNEA like this, So I believe it has to be more about implementation, and I believe youth can contribute on changing the behavioral pattern of people when it comes to sustainable consumption and production. Thank you.
What was that quote again? Can I use it in the future? The right one, not the first two. I'm kidding. Go ahead. Thank you. Yes? You want to tell us who you are?
I am Ammar Al-Awlaki. I am Deputy Minister of Environment in the Republic of Yemen. The observation is that regarding the goals, the development goals, I think it starts with humans and it goes back to humans. On the remark that my friend there just mentioned, it seems that it's, as the judge has started talking about corruption, I am newly appointed in the government of Yemen. I was part of the youth and the revolution and the new generation in Yemen. And I was surprised that it's not just corruption, but it's incompetency. We are suffering from human resource development in the environment sector. And we will need to develop that, and we will need to build capacities. And I hope UNEA can start doing that. And the second question is related to it. I kept asking myself, what can I take back? I think if I ask everyone here if they have participated in conferences and events such as this one, everyone will raise their hands. But what actions have followed? And that's the real question. As a Deputy Minister of Environment, I would love to have the tools to help me do my job. And I hope that UNEA will do that for me. Will be the portal that I go to, will be the how-to source for all the questions that I need answered. Thank you.
Good point. Folks, anyone want to comment on that? I mean, especially the young lady from India who's Justice, she was talking to you.
Oh, she was
You can never eliminate poverty. You can't say that, she says.
Well, when you were speaking, I was looking at you and asking myself, what was I doing when I had your age? And it's fabulous to have you and other young people here participating in this global embrace of the environment. What I said, and I hope you don't disagree entirely, is that laws can do many things, but laws cannot change things that need more than laws. So poverty requires so many components in facing such a challenge. And it would be naive for a judge or a legislator to think that, we can enact a statute and abolish poverty, and the next day poverty would be abolished. So it's not that laws are not necessary. They are very important. If you look around, many countries that are the poorest, they are the poorest not just in respect to human dignity, the basic service that we expect from our government and from society as a whole, but they are very poor in respect to the rule of law. So we have to tackle both together.
Yeah, Farouk, the gentleman from Nigeria, says MDGs didn't really fail. They didn't really fail. They just needed actionable targets.
I completely agree. The MDGs were not a failure. They saved literally millions of lives and took millions more out of poverty. But you've got to also take it at a much deeper level of granulation, which is that a lot of that came from the economic growth base in China, which took about 300 million people out of poverty. More even, yes. And when you remove China from the statistics, which have a very large skewing effect, the picture doesn't look so rosy. So at the global aggregated level, it looks the MDGs did a lot of good. And they did. There's no doubt about it, because they mobilized resources in a way we've never seen before. But you've also got to question the kind of growth China had and whether it is truly sustainable. Of course, we are all familiar with the growing environmental problems that China is now facing, which is on the back of that very same economic growth. So it's a problem. So yes, the MDGs did very good things, but I would say that they were almost structurally flawed, which again, they didn't really address the drivers of poverty. They only looked for solutions to the poverty.
Yeah.
So again, that's the thing. But even more so, and that's the question is, yes, maybe we can't eradicate poverty, but we can sure as hell try. And that's what we're going to do. And I hope we're all on that same page with that. And actually, addressing the other points as well, I'm under orders to be provocative. And this is maybe a very provocative thing to say at UNEA, but I'm going to say it anyways. I don't believe sustainable development is a cause for the environment. I believe it's a cause for fairness. And I characterize 4 types of fairness. Interpersonal fairness, so between individuals. I have no ownership or greater slice of the pie or the trees or nature than Julia does. It addresses some issues of corruption, and in general incompetency. There's intersocietal fairness, which is the second type, so between groups of people and countries and everything else, which addresses transboundary issues, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. There's interbiological fairness, which is that we are not the only species on the planet. It is not ours to wreck, and certainly we do not have the moral authority to drive species to extinction. So that's very much the biological part of it. And the 4th dimension, of course, is intergenerational fairness, which is justice over time. And I think that many of the environmental issues that we're grappling with and we discuss here are a product of unfair, unjust, and unequitable behavior that's come to date. And I think if we shift the discussion about what sustainable development really is to something based on fairness, we'll have much better luck in actually achieving things. And quite frankly, I work in sustainable development, and I'm tired of losing. I want to start winning. We've been losing for far too long, and we are sitting on a socio-ecological time bomb. We're running out of time. Yeah. We have to start winning.
Nathan, you want to say something real quick?
Yes, and actually in terms of fairness and justice, and also on the success of the MDGs, we've been seeing that the MDGs were planned according to Corinne Woods from the UN Millennium Campaign, were planned out by very smart men, but just a group of select individual white men in a room, and then planned them out. With little participation from society. And here we're looking at stakeholder engagement and participation. How do we engage civil society, which constitutes the target for sustainable development, and also as well a very important force to mobilize for sustainable development? It's important for civil society to have a sense of ownership of the development agenda, and that's necessary to engage them in the formulation and then afterwards the implementation to build the interest and the mobilization onwards for the Sustainable Development Goals to be a success.
Yeah. Do you agree with your colleague over there from India that we can never eradicate or eliminate poverty? Do you agree? One word answer. Yes, no. Yes, no.
Well, can you please repeat the question?
Can we ever get rid of poverty?
Yes.
Ma'am, you have a question or comment over there?
Oh, hi. Actually, it wasn't on illegal wildlife trade. It was going to be, but then Justice Benjamin stimulated me a bit with his comment. He said a lovely thing. He said, once you get these international treaties, the process is guaranteed once it gets into domestic legislation. I'm here to tell you it's not, because unfortunately we're seeing now a bit of a trend, and this is I guess a challenge for environment ministers, a bit of a trend to roll back environment legislation. So we're seeing it come back out of a good process where we're developing case law, where there's good approvals processes happening, through to that being seen as a constraint and environmental laws then being taken away. So the first message is for environment ministers, beware, they're after you. And the second thing is more of an opportunity for environment ministers. You talked about what targets could be transformational under the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think there's one that could be amazingly transformational. I think environment ministers should go and make best friends with their finance ministers and say, I can offer you a very, very large bucket of money. Let's work together to stop agricultural, fossil fuels, fisheries, subsidies. And I notice IISD is sitting in the audience there, and they can give you an idea of the scale of the numbers we're talking about there. But a target like that could be incredibly transformational at getting rid of the disincentives around sustainable production and consumption.
Mm-hmm. Sir? Yeah, good point. Okay. Sir, in the middle there. Yep.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Cletus Springer. I'm from the island of St. Lucia, the most beautiful island in the world. I got to say that because it's true. I just had four ideas I wanted to put on the table. First of all, I think this town hall concept, practice, Achim, I want to suggest that this be institutionalized across UNEP.
And I'd like the same host each time?
Yeah, that'll work. But I think we need to create in our conferences and seminars and workshops and what have you, give ordinary people a voice in these things. It's not a difficult thing to do. We can do it here because obviously everybody's here. But you know, if you have a workshop in Barbados or in St. Lucia, we should have a mechanism that can bring people into these rooms and hear their voices. So I would encourage that this be done. Secondly, we just had a meeting in this room earlier today, and each participant in that room was given a form and asked to indicate, to give a voluntary commitment to promote and develop environmental rule of law, which was the theme of the meeting. And I believe this is another idea that should be institutionalized and carried forward. Too many of us come into these meetings expecting something to be done for us and not seizing the moment to learn as much as we can to commit to do something for ourselves or for our communities. And I believe perhaps we need to turn the axis on these conferences a bit. Third point I wanted to make is on the SDGs. It's great for us to have goals, it's great for us to have smart targets and what have you. It's great for us to be able to monitor whether we are making progress towards that. But what is critical that we don't lose sight of is to understand what are the reasons why we are not making progress. And the concern I have in the SDG process is that we don't quite have a mechanism that would allow us to zoom in, you know, to have a kind of problem-solving approach to the thing. Yeah, we have a goal, and we want to reduce poverty. Yeah, we have measured and we realize that we're 30% short of our goal. But why? And what can we do to fix it? And I can tell you that goals and targets are not going to address issues like vulnerability, inherent vulnerability in the Caribbean, for example. You can have a goal that says you're going to do X, but then a cyclone comes and turns you upside down and changes your GDP growth projections from a 6% positive growth to -10, as happened in Grenada in 2004 after the passage of Hurricane Ivan. These are the real issues that need to be, that are underlying, and underlie poverty, and underlie equity, and all of these things that we're speaking about. And by the way, Farouk, I really like those four elements that you've put across. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Fiona Nyangoma, and I'm a Kenyan and a young Kenyan. And I wanted to know how exactly are the Sustainable Development Goals going to solve the poaching crisis that's happening globally? As a young Kenyan, I'm very concerned that a lot of our species are going away in the hands of these ruffians. And as much as we're all here talking about change, what is actually going to be practically done to make sure these issues dissipate? Because for us, at least, wildlife contributes greatly to our tourism industry and also to our heritage. Do I have to go to another country now to experience a different kind of experience just because our wildlife is being attacked? And should that happen to other young people and other future generations? Because it is a travesty, and it's absolutely devastating to talk about when you start seeing the new statistics. So what will the SDGs do to change things practically?
An elephant is slaughtered every 20 minutes in Africa. this session was going to last 90 minutes. 4 elephants will have been slaughtered. So yeah, very good, valid point. So, Dr. Noronha, you go first.
Now, I'm not going to answer this question directly, but I want to highlight the fact that this is true of various things. If you look at the environmental natural resources, you have exploitation happening across all of it. So wildlife is one element of it, a very serious element of it, but you also see destruction of the environment in beautiful islands. You see the destruction of natural resources where mining is happening, absolutely rampantly. So the problem is much more systemic, and I think it's important for us to try and understand, go beyond, to figure out what are the incentives which are creating this kind of exploitation of all kinds of environmental and natural resources. And if you start beginning to address that in terms of what are, so the unfairness of it all is one thing that you want to look at, but more than that, you want to see where the investments are happening, you want to see where the governments are applying their minds to it, and what is creating the kind of imbalance between growth and environmental and natural resources management. Unless we do this in a systematic way, we'll only be picking up different elements and focusing attention on that. I'm not suggesting that's not very important, but I'm just saying let's also discuss this in a more systemic way.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Justice, go ahead.
Let me try to combine two comments. One by our colleague from which country?
WWF International.
Oh, WWF International.
Oh, we know that
and a comment that Farouk made at the very end of one of his interventions. So Farouk said, I'm tired of losing. I want to win. And I would like to challenge that we are losing. And you very correctly showed a concern in respect to some countries that are backsliding on legislation that they enacted 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So in other words, that we cannot really trust those countries in transplanting or making, domesticating international law. It's very difficult to measure success in the environmental context. But from a legal perspective, let me give you just 2 or 3 examples very, very briefly. 40 years ago, it's not that we didn't have laws protecting the environment. We did have the whole system against the environment. The whole system providing a legal framework for the free and often even the devastating exploitation of natural resources. And in 40 years, we're able to change that entirely. From the very low regulations passed by the administration to constitutional provisions. It took 200 years for the Human Rights Declaration of the French Revolution to reach the constitutions of many countries. And then the protection of the environment in the most amazing language has reached constitutions in less than 30 years. And then property rights. We completely changed the paradigm of property rights. And I could go on and on. The development of new principles, the precautionary principle, for example, that didn't exist at all 40 years ago. It's not that it didn't exist in environmental law, it didn't exist in the legal system. And more recently, to address exactly the issue that the backsliding, we are developing and experimenting with the principle of non-regression. So countries do not have a right to backslide on issues that have to do with the survival of their people, their nation, and humanity. So Farouk, I understood fully what you said, that you want to win more easily. But what I'm saying that you said is a caricature of you said, but I'm just borrowing from there and saying that we have been winning
in spite of the growth in the red list of IUCN, in spite of the growth of the list in CITES. But what about if we didn't have everything that we have built in the last 40 years? How bad we would be.
Yeah, I'd like to just, I'd like to just add to that. I do think also we're winning on many grounds. However, we don't have that much time either. We don't have hundreds of years. That we know. So now what happens next? I think if the Sustainable Development Goals don't result in a general movement by everyone, I mean everyone, to make them happen, to make sure, breathing down the necks of every level of government that will have committed to them, and to make sure it happens. Many of us are not talking about it. It has to go to the street. I actually don't know why you all don't have "I love sustainable behavior" on your buttons there, because that okay, all right, but you could have made it into an acronym. But I think we now know, and every single one of us in this room has got to be committed to changing our lifestyles so that we can influence our neighbor and they can influence their neighbors. You know, I'm a director general of IUCN, and whenever I can, I ride a bicycle to my office, which didn't used to be seen as very distinguished for a director general. Well, now we just have to change. Somebody said to me the other day, how come a director general wears a backpack? Well, it's just a lot more practical. But every single one of us has to be a part of this movement. And I think you're right, Antonio, lots of great things are happening. We're not failing, but we will fail if we don't move fast. And all of us.
Farouk, let's answer Fiona's question real quick. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How are Sustainable Development Goals going to help solve issues like poaching, real quick?
Well, picking up on what Fiona was saying, and Cletus, and maybe even a bit of Susan, I would pass on a question to UNEA and to the environment ministers instead, which is, you know, what really, Achim said yesterday in his opening address that this is a moment of profound change. He's speaking about the SDGs and UNEA and everything else. Yes, it is an opportunity for profound change. We just need to take it. Can we do that? Do we have the courage to do so? But what I really want to know, and the question that I think we should all be asking all of the ministers for the next couple of days, is what is the role of UNEA in the SDGs? And more specifically, and this has come up through a couple of the questions now, is what is the role of UNEA in the implementation of the SDGs? And I think that's the really more salient bit. I have to be honest, I'm not convinced that UNEA can have a huge impact on the design of the goals in New York. The process is running very quickly. I think there's some gaps that we really need to address, and UNEA needs to speak very clearly about one or two things, such as SCP, such as some of these other things that we've discussed. But really, in implementation, I think there are some key policy levers that could be used. The MEAs, for example. How will the MEAs be mobilized towards the delivery of...
MEAs?
Oh, sorry. Multilateral environmental agreements. Which UNEP has, I think, some over 1,000 or something, isn't there? I gotta say 500. Sorry.
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe about 500, but not UNEP.
SEP in the 10-year framework for programs, which is the underpinning program for that. How will that be operationalized in the SDGs? How will the GEF be used, which is the global environmental facility for funding these things.
Stop using these acronyms.
Sorry.
Everybody will understand that.
But how will these things be put into place? And I think these are key policy levers at the disposal of UNEA. And I want to understand from this week how those things will be arranged and put towards the good use to address this problem, exactly what Fiona was saying. How will the SDGs stop poaching? I can offer my suggestions, but that doesn't really matter. It's really the question for environment ministers here this week. And I think we should all ask them that same question.
Nathan, real quick, and then we'll take a couple more points. Go ahead.
I was told to be provocative during this session, so I'll add on to that. We've been talking how historic the UNEA is, and recently one of our participants from the Youth Constituency from the Climate Process has followed closely what UNEP has been discussing during Rio +20, and he wrote a research paper on evaluating what the impact would be if UNEP became a World Environment Organization. And has UNEP been enough? Would it be more powerful to actually get action on environment in the SDGs by developing UNEP and setting a target for UNEP to become a World Environment Organization? I'm curious. I'd like to know what the feeling is about this.
Isn't it? I'm kidding. Okay. Let's get a couple more points in there. This side, yeah. Sir, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I am Tony Estanguet, Olympic champion and member of the International Olympic Committee. Thank you for this debate and to give me the opportunity to speak. I'm not an expert in environment. I'm here because 20 years ago, I've been touched by the practice of sport, and I've been educated through sport to respect the environment, which is the support of many sports. And my comment is, if we want that everyone has to be involved and committed to this change, I think sport could be a good tool to use, and I would be very pleased to hear about the experts' opinion about what could be the link between sport and environment. Thank you.
And you're speaking as a professional because you've won 3 gold medals in the Olympics, haven't you, in sport of canoeing, right? Yes. My goodness. Canoeing is a sport? No, I'm kidding.
As a Canadian, I take offense.
Sir, in the middle there, go.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gaylord Mwema, Kenyan. I'm a student by profession, but here I'm with the Ministry of Environment, Water and Natural Resources. I'd first start off by saying, as we began, we've started with the debate on MDGs, they've failed, they've not failed, and in my opinion, I think this is sad because right now I can assure you there's still people out there who are still working on those goals. Yes, we did not achieve them, but we haven't failed because we are still working on them. And a very good analogy, this is the football season. Even if you're 15-0 at 15 minutes of the game, you're still not lost because there's still time, there's still to make progress. The time hasn't run out yet. And we cannot start saying that MDGs have failed or not because the goals are there. The goals were just as a mark, as a guideline. And then even after the goals were achieved, there'll still be a new set of goals to ensure that the same mistakes were not repeated. On sustainable consumption and production, I'd like to state that one of the avenues of achieving sustainable consumption and production that I feel, and I was sharing with a few other youth yesterday, and they agreed with me, is that one of the greatest avenues that we've ignored is the linkage between the producer and the consumer. In that, we have products with nutritional facts. You know, you have sugar content and all that. Why can't we have such for cleaner production, cleaner consumption, where we can have the producers of specific products having the little tidbits on the side, just somewhere. You know, that's a very big opportunity, which sadly nobody has brought forth, although many people do agree, but nobody's talking about it. Secondly, in terms of incompetency, as somebody mentioned on incompetency as a reason why the goals keep failing. And when we talk of incompetency, we still go back to the point of mindset change. And some of the people that need mindset change, the people who need that mindset change the most are the people in this room. Those are the first people. I mean, how many of us have left a bottle after you've drunk water, you've left it there because there's somebody who's coming to clean? You know, that is part of the mindset you need to change, knowing that it is your own personal initiative. Nobody else is going to come and fight for a cleaner environment if you don't start yourself. So as much as we want to change the mindset of the people on the streets, we should also start by changing our very own mindset, taking actions into our own hand. Thank you.
Okay. You guys are really becoming unplugged. You're coming unplugged. So let's get a couple more points in there. Lady there in the back with the red thingy. Yep, you, yes. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi. My name is Ines, and this is my second day at UNEP, so if I'm fired tomorrow, you will know why. no, just actually it was to rebound on this commentary, which was very interesting, and a point that wasn't really tackled, that was behind all arguments, is that as long as we are all very committed, we are all from public interest and NGOs and civil society, but I think that our power is limited, and we have to recognize that in the end, development patterns and trends are also led by economic and financial interests. And, well, economic and financial interests means short-term economic interest by making money. So there has been some exercise to try and change the way we measure health, we measure growth, we measure development, but as we see still in the reports and in how the way we measure a country's health, a country's wealth, it's by GDP, it's by import, exports, it's by a country is happy when its public enterprise sell products, sell high infrastructure, etc. So the exercise that was made to change actually the measure of wealth and change the GDP measurement, that was the Stiglitz, I don't know how, the Stiglitz Commission. They tried to change the measure and actually have integrated environmental aspects, social aspects, but that wasn't really put into place, and it was a bit forgotten since then. So I think I would like to understand and to hear the private sector not only talk about green economy and how, yes, investing in green energy makes money, but how actually investing in environment and measuring wealth and health and richness is also about long-term goals, long-term investment benefits, and not only short-term return on investment. Thank you.
Did you say this is your second day at UNEP?
Yes.
Achim, is that career ending? Is that point career? Let's get a couple more and then we'll answer. Sir, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Peter Denton. I'm one of the 3 civil society representatives here from Canada, including Nathan. And I have 3 short points to share with you. One, Canada, we really know about silos. We see them all over our landscape on the prairies. And I should let you know that we refer to them as cylinders of excellence. That's a joke. I want to echo Farouk's comments about whether we're winning or losing. I think there's a real danger that we find ourselves here in this space in a sort of mutual admiration society where if I tell you you're green and you tell me I'm green, we're both green, and anybody outside taking one look at us knows we're not. So I think there is a real concern there that we are doing good things, we're making progress, but in terms of what needs to be done, what the world looks at us and expects of us, I don't think we're anywhere close. I was at the Governing Council the last time in 2013, and the real difference between then and now is the level of political interference with the agenda of UNEP. And that is something that the government delegations have to deal with because they are dealing with the future of the planet. We are not simply playing politics here. And the third point that I would make is that I also represent a very rare species in these courts, because I am an accredited representative of a faith community, which received its full accreditation from UNEP about a month ago. Now that raises hackles in some places, I'm quite sure. But I think that the faith communities around the world have a voice that needs to be heard. It's in many places, it's what is in communities on the ground, and it's the perspective that needs to be shared. And a challenge that I would lay out to the executive director and the president of UNEA is that why doesn't UNEA start, instead with a moment of silence like we are at a funeral, why does it not start with an affirmation, a covenant, to which every member, every delegate at least has to stand there and listen to begin the deliberations that determine the future of the planet? If UNEA is a historic opportunity and a new moment and the start of something that we need for a sustainable future, why don't we articulate that in a way that people can affirm at the beginning? Thank you.
Good point. Yeah. In the back there, sir.
So, I'm Satish Kumar from Ethiopia. Mine is simple, taking cue from Farouk and also my predecessor. My question to the governments are that, whether we call it sustainable development goals or global environmental goals or millennium development goals, it is the same governments which have been negotiating from 1970 to come up with all these goals, but when they go back to their countries, they fail to implement them. And it is the civil society which actually acts as a bulwark and an advocacy, through their advocacy, try to make these governments to know their responsibilities, but now they are, the space for the civil societies are also shrinking in most of the countries, especially in Africa. So what do we do with these governments and these ministers? Can we hope that they will, this week, they will again sit down and discuss and agree and clap and have dinners and breakfasts, but when they go back to their countries, they're not going to implement them. So what shall we do with them?
The simple answer is you run for office. That could change. In the middle there, let's get a couple from the middle. Yep, behind, sir, in the beard thing.
Thank you, Dan McGraw. I'm a little troubled by this idea that we want to stop losing and only winning. I'm troubled first because it understates how much progress we've made and how much harm we've prevented. I'm not saying that we're where we need to be, but I think it's not helpful in that sense because people are working very hard and we often do lose and we need to support each other when we lose and when we are successful. The second is it seems it has a wrong perspective on what this fight is about. The price of a healthy planet is eternal vigilance. We are never going to win everything. We're going to face the kind of backsliding that was referred to, and we have to be ready for that. We have to be toughened for that. And I don't think that phrase really captures that. And I want to just identify 3 areas of danger right here. One was just mentioned, and that is that the political interference with UNEP's agenda right now seems unprecedented in the last, well, since it started. The second is we're clearly backsliding, or we seem to be backsliding in terms of public participation and the rights of us to participate in UNEP's activities. What governments are talking about now would leave us worse off than we were a year ago. And the third is not really backsliding, it's just a terrible missed opportunity and is a little embarrassing, I think, and that is the current one-year temporary, I hope, policy on access to information. It's worse than the World Bank's. Many of us worked with the World Bank to get its access to information policy out, and UNEP's is worse than that. I understand it's worse than UNDP's. And I'm not blaming Mr. Steiner for that. I think that events somehow got carried away, but it is bad in several ways. And so the backsliding or the dangers are right here this week. And we all have to be very vigilant about that and try to rectify this situation. Thank you.
Achim, we did say this was unplugged, right? Ma'am.
Very thanks you for giving me the chance. I'm waiting for this for a long time. I'm Ding Pan, coming from Tongji University from China. We came here. I'm very happy to see the goals of this conference is about towards dignity life for everybody. When we talk about the sustainability development, we'll talk about environment, illegal wildlife. I know this is some steps to make progress for everybody to live better. But I think maybe sometimes the targets are changed. We don't know the way is too long for everybody to live a dignity life for everybody. And we also talk about to judge, but who is judge, how to judge. And I see many conferences, we must take some problems on the agenda. But after that, what should we do? I don't know how we to see this is beneficial for everybody. So thank you.
Let's get more comments in. Lady in the yellow right in the middle. You've been raising your hand for a while.
Hi, I'm Kaksha Basu. I'm one of the global coordinators of UNEP's major groups for children and youth, along with Nathan. I actually have a question for Ms. Julia. As you know, the rate of species extinction is increasing rapidly. So how can we engage civil society and social media and other tools to retard this degradation? Thank you.
I'm Carmen Capriles from the Women's Major Group. In 1987, the Brundtland Commission defined sustainable development as the kind of development we need to satisfy our needs and guarantee the needs of the next generations. Also, in 1987 was the last year that the planet had a concentration less than 350 of CO2 in the atmosphere. And it's the one thing that really compromises the future of not only the next generation, but the planet itself. Now we're talking about the SDGs, and we're really not taking into account climate change. And when we say that we don't have time, it's not because we are not able to do that, but it's because there is a total lack of political will. It's a big elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about and to give a solution. It's the one thing that increases and magnifies all the injustice and unfairness that we're facing today. And it's a big problem that we have not been able to solve in the last 30 or 40 years with conventions, with international treaties and so on. So it's SDGs gives the floor to keep on fighting in a new multilateral arena on this issue, because it's the one issue that cannot be solved in a local level. We need to join forces at a global arena if we want to really put an end and start tackling climate change as we should. And we're still taking it off. We don't want to see it. We're trying to cover the sun with one finger. So we have to start acting, and I think it's one of the crucial things that we have to fight if we want to really continue the work that was done with the MDGs and continue the work that was done on the different environmental and development agendas, not only international level, but also in local level, to see a new regime on how to face and how to find solutions on climate change. And it's one thing that we should keep on pushing to be an SDG and to have very concrete targets, and also that really sees these inequalities that are existing today. Thank you.
Okay, I really want, yeah, good point. I really want to get to illegal wildlife trade, because we haven't actually even touched on that, and that's a whole other topic, and we don't have time. By the way, if you're wondering what the scores are in the World Cup, I'm sure half of you are wondering. Halftime, England, Costa Rica. Oh, you have it on your phones? 0-0. Italy, Uruguay, 0-0. Not bad. Okay, Julie, you answered that question about species extinction, and then I have a question for UNEP Deputy Director Ibrahim Tiao. I have a question for you, sir. Real quick, Julia, real quick.
Yeah, the species loss. So the Red List of Threatened Species has been working as a health check on the state of our planet for the last 50 years. This year we're celebrating 50 years. It would be great if we could stop, but things are not going very well. 1/4 of mammals are in danger of disappearing. They're our closest cousins, by the way. And you would be very worried if that was 1/4 of your family or your best friends. You'd do something about it. So, but it cannot simply be a gloom and doom story. There are success stories in all of this, and we have to. The conservation community has to talk about what works. And then those things that work have to be scaled up. And what works often is our legal instruments, such as protected areas of all categories. I just want to say, and this is related to the other stuff, the so-called political interference. I haven't been here long enough to know, but I can tell you that there is one of the 500 or so multilateral environment agreements, the World Heritage Convention, which over the last 42 years has been protecting outstanding universal values on our planet. And so we have to make sure that we keep that. That is very important. That is implementation. Just last week in Doha, or a few days ago, for example, and this is kind of related, this is related to the next topic, which we're not going to get to very much, and there is a game reserve in Tanzania, the Selous Game Reserve, which was on the World Heritage List because it had at one point outstanding universal values, very tough criteria. And governments are kind of pushing us, oh, loosen that criteria, and we just refuse to do it. We shouldn't do it. However, last week, that particular game reserve has been put on the World Heritage in danger list because of the unprecedented amount of poaching that's going on there. And hopefully that will embarrass the people running that game reserve to say, hey, this is really embarrassing. We're going to have to do something about it. So, but we need to make sure these instruments that we do have to protect species, to come back to your question, are really working. It's not enough to say we have a protected area. We've got to make sure it's well managed and it's taken seriously.
Okay, UNEP Deputy Executive Director Ibrahim Thiaw. Let me ask you this. This topic is called illegal wildlife trade, as opposed to what? Legal wildlife trade? You know what I'm saying? Isn't that an oxymoron? We are unplugged, aren't we, Achim? You're an expert on wildlife crime, right? I mean,
I am not an expert on wildlife crime, but the issue that you are raising is very, very important, which is the illicit exploitation of natural resources in general, wildlife being one of them. And there are 5 issues that are critically important. Wildlife, forest resources are being depleted as well, illegally. Minerals are also being depleted in many parts of the world. The richer the country, the poorer the nation or the people. You have chemicals and waste that are being dumped in many sites. And of course, you have the issue of wildlife trade that you mentioned. Now, this is a major loss to developing countries. It has been estimated by many, including UNEP experts, that a total of $200 billion are being lost by developing nations due to this illegal or illicit exploitation or trade of natural resources. Now, if you compare that to the total ODA, is 130 billion. So close to twice as much as ODA is being actually smuggled, is being stolen from developing countries. This is a critical issue. Now, for a country like Kenya or Tanzania or many other countries in Africa, losing this wildlife means, of course, that patrimony is being depleted, is being stolen. But it means that ecosystems are being degraded. If you don't have elephants or rhinos or tigers or other species, you don't have the same ecosystem anymore. But what does it mean as well is that those that are trading these resources, they are associated with drug trafficking, with human trafficking, with armed trafficking, and you have a web of complex issues that go beyond the capacity of one department in a given country, or even of one country, or even in one region in the world. It has to be tackled at a global level, and when Mr. Denton, I think, was saying that UNEA is being politicized, thanks God it is being politicized, because we need the political leadership to tackle the big issues that we are dealing with. Let me just maybe come to the issue of success or non-success of MDGs and results. If Lydia, the director of DTIE, was given more time, she would have told you that thanks to one of her programs, which is lead in fuel, just the fact of phasing out lead in fuel is saving 2 million lives per year. Now, that's not small. At this UNEA, we expect member states will adopt a resolution on air quality. Now, air quality is killing 7 million people per year. If these meetings and these UNEAs, people will say this is another UN conference. Yes, it is one of them. But it is one of these conferences that make decisions, and these decisions have a huge impact on humanity. It may not be visible, and as environmentalists, we have been dealing with doom and gloom, but we have to also celebrate from time to time some of the successes, and they are there. And the MDGs have been a success, not a total success, but the fact that they existed is already a big success. And the SDGs, will be another big success, because every single country in the world will agree that these are the goals that we need to contribute to and work together. If these goals were not negotiated and agreed upon, nothing would have happened. People would have had a cacophony as we have had in the last 50 years or so.
So are you, yeah. Are you blaming me for not giving Lygia enough time? Justice Antonio, you want to say something real quick?
Thank you.
Real quick.
Well, very quickly, 2 points on illegal trade on wildlife. The first one is that the fact that we say illegal and we assume implicitly that there is legal trade should not block us from asking another question of whether it's ethical or unethical. Because there are things that are legal, but they are unethical. And I don't need to go much deeper into this debate. I think you understood what I can go as far as this. The second problem, and I think Ibrahim touched upon it briefly, is that we all have in our penal codes provisions that address stealing. But we don't see traffic in wildlife or natural resource as stealing as well. We see traffic in wildlife, for example, ivory, as a killing only of an animal, and the penalty is usually very small. We see taking out natural resources like diamonds from protected areas or gold as just doing illegal mining, but it's stealing the property that belongs not just to individuals, and we punish that very strictly, but taking away from society as a whole, because the nation is the owner of those resources. Those 2 minor points.
Yeah, and also charcoal burning as well, right? You know, groups like Al-Shabaab are using that to fuel their fight, if you will. $50 million a year, right? Okay, let's get some points from the floor, because we're going to wrap up soon, folks. So, a few points from the floor. Yes, starting with you.
So yeah, I'm Victoria. I'm from Canada, one of the 3 Canadian nationals that I guess was brought up. I'm part of the Major Group for Children and Youth, and I'm also here part of the TUNZA program, which is the Children and Youth Outreach Unit of UNEP, together with my friends here, and as well as Fiona and Ugrana over there. So this is partly a response to what you said, you raised earlier about the UN High Commissioner for Future Generations, or the Ombudsperson for Future Generations, and partly a statement to the rest of the room here. So what you had asked Nathan, at Rio Plus 20, the Ombudsperson for Future Generations was brought up. And if you were the Ombudsperson for Future Generations, what would you say? Would you be happy with what was decided here at UNEA? And so I'm going to take the liberty of putting myself in that person's shoes and say, well, rather than say whether or not I was happy with what happened at UNEA, like, where was I at UNEA? And since I wasn't decided at Rio Plus 20, and I'm maybe not decided here at UNEA, then where was my soul at UNEA? And so my soul would be the children and youth who are here today. And so now I'm going to go into that sort of a question for the rest of the room. And also a statement, because last week, children and youth came together from all over the world. We put together a statement for UNEA, for the ministers at UNEA. And so that statement was put together by people from all over the world, from all regions, as well as an online consultation process from the Major Group for Children and Youth. And so the past few days, we've been trying to lobby governments, the Secretariat, to get that statement read out. Just a 3-minute speaking slot at the ministerial meeting, either on Thursday or Friday. So far, we're not really sure what's going to happen with that speaking slot. So we're just here today to ask you to give us that 3-minute speaking slot to present our youth statement on behalf of children and youth all over the world to the Ministerial Council at UNEA, either on Thursday or Friday. Thank you. And I'm almost happy right now, almost.
All right, two things. One, are you applying for that job of ombudsman?
No, I'm still in university, so still unemployed. So
Okay.
work on that youth unemployment issue, please.
All right. Number two, is there anyone in this room who's not from Canada? Goodness. Sir.
Make up for the government,
Thank you very much, Chairman. My name is Giles Dixon. I work for Alstom. We are a technology company. We like to think of ourselves as a solution provider. We agree with many of the comments that have been made. There are real grounds for concern out there. We share many of these concerns. We also think, however, there are grounds for optimism, especially when we look at political trends and trends in legislation. Now, I know that doesn't chime with comments that others have made, but I just want to give some examples. China has recently introduced tough new limits on coal production and has set a tough new target for the share of coal in its energy mix. India is slowly introducing demanding new standards on air quality, and perhaps most encouragingly of all, 39 countries in the world and 23 subnational jurisdictions have now put a price on carbon or are in the process of putting a price on carbon. That includes South Africa, it includes Mexico, Chile, Kazakhstan, Korea. Perhaps most interestingly, it also includes 7 states and provinces in China, accounting for 20% of China's GDP. So politically, doors are opening. It's up to us to keep pushing hard on them. Thank you, Chairman.
Nice point. Okay. Guys, we have a cocktail coming up in about 10 minutes or so. You guys want to remain in this room? You want to stay? Achim, it's your word, man. It's your call. I'm on the clock here, man. I'm going to be on overtime soon.
Bring the cocktails.
I'm kidding.
Cocktails in here.
Bring the cocktails here. Okay, 3 points, and then Achim, you say something, and then some conclusion, and we are out of here, okay? Starting with you, man. Go.
Finally. I'm Lucy from Kenya, and my opinion is that no matter how much we sit in meetings and talk about MDGs and SDGs, the main problem we have in our societies is poverty and corruption. But I would put corruption at the top. Because, for instance, in Kenya, we had the Vision 2015, then someone did not allocate the money, or someone literally ate the money, so we don't have the hospitals. Now Vision 2015 became Vision 2030, and at this rate, it might be maybe Vision 2080. But basically, my point is, we have all these visions, we have all these goals, but then so long as there's corruption, we are not going anywhere. Because we keep saying, for instance, if we want sustainable consumption and production, we want to share our resources. Farmers in Kiambu have so much milk, and other people in other parts do not have the milk. So we have to increase distribution. But how do we do that? When someone uses the money meant for the road to buy a Vogue because they need a better car. So the farmers cannot take their products to the market. So we have food in one part of the land, but we do not have food on the other side. And we are not connected. Why? Because we have a lot of corruption. And then we talk about sustainable development, but then we are not leading by example. For instance, I think 90% of the fuel guzzlers in Nairobi right now belong to the diplomatic community. They have all the Vogues and the fuel guzzlers that are spending so much fuel and then polluting the environment. And then we are going to sit here in meetings and then go for dinners and cocktails and say, we want the change. But then if you want the change, you have to be the change that you want to become. We have to lead from the front. We just can't keep signing documents and shaking hands and agreeing. If we want a clean environment, it has to start with us. And for instance, UNEP and other bodies have to lead from the front. And then tackle corruption, so that when someone kills an elephant, it is not a matter of whose father they are or whose son they are. If there's going to be laws, the laws have to be implemented equally to everyone. So basically, we have to deal with corruption and then lead by example. Okay. And happy evening.
Okay, thank you. Do you work for the UN?
I decline to answer on the grounds that it might incriminate me.
Vision 2080. Wow. Go ahead, man.
I'm Chehek Bilgi from India. I'm part of the Youth Forum and also representing WECF. My question is that there's a lot of population, as we know, in this world, and as we know that India itself is highly populated. So how do we make sure that the outcomes of the UNEA and SDGs will spread over the world, and how do people, especially from the developing countries, work towards the outcome, towards its outcome?
Right next to her, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jesse Ibrahim from Malaysia. I'm a youth representative for Asia Pacific for the Tunza UNEP. And one of the things I would like to raise is that for the past few days I've been seeing banners and things promoting sustainable palm oil plantations or industries, which I think is something that really disheartens me because I come from a region, Malaysia and Indonesia and Borneo are victims of this industry whereby our biodiversity has been depleted, and this industry enables the deaths and the mistreatments of farmers, child labor, and also I really think it's unethical and unsustainable, this thing.
Okay. Ma'am, is there anyone in this room who doesn't want to say anything? just asking.
Thank you very much. My name is Jessica Kazina. I work for UNEP in Office of Operations. I got a report card once in a primary school and I got 90%.
90 or 19?
90%. And the teacher wrote on my report that, well done, Jessica, but try harder. That 10% haunted me, and I tried very hard. Now, what I want to say is that UNEP will have a report card. UNEP is not the only one, though, that deals with MDGs and SDGs. There are other entities. I'm involved with an organization called Rotary International in my private time when I'm not working for UNEP. And in this organization, we do a lot of work in the community, at very grassroots level. And a lot of times they say, oh, you work for UNEP. Tell us, what about this? What about that? Where do you go? And I'm wondering whether UNEP is going to have, or UNEA is going to have an area or a space where it can give wananchi or people or organizations that are not part of a mainstream organizations to give expertise, to give help, to guide, and to help us in achieving the same goals that UNEP has been trying to achieve. And MDGs haven't failed. They've done very well, but that 90%, 10% still has to be looked at. So try harder, UNEP.
Try harder indeed. That's a perfect segue to Executive Director of UNEP, Achim Steiner. Try harder, my brother. Yeah, in an unplugged way.
Well, first of all, let me say what a wonderful evening this has been to listen to you, and that was my hope, that we would have set an example of how ministers could actually conduct a dialogue and a session. We have many profound points tonight, and I want to begin by thanking you, Jeff, for accepting this. This is not your usual bread and butter, or however you would describe it, but it's great to have you here, and thank you also to our panelists, because we needed some kickoffs. You don't have to answer all the questions. I can't answer all the questions either. But I think one thread that ran right through this evening is we shouldn't actually deny the successes, because in part they are the foundation on which we build what will come next. And I always say that, you know, environmentalists are impatient because that's human nature. Environmentalists also have many reasons to be impatient, because as we describe the problems, we are in a fast-forward movie. It's a frighteningly fast-forward movie that's happening. And that's part of the reason why we always have to ask ourselves, why do we end up so often with a negative bottom line? Well, partly because the escalation of the problems are constantly overtaking us. Population, wealth, technology, the ability of running around with 2 cell phones and a computer, and so on and so on. But let me just say, many of you spoke also to the successes, and I think this is part of the schizophrenia that we live in. We have to constantly remind the world that actually it ain't good enough. But not by questioning that which actually has been accomplished. And I think what I would also say to you, this forum that we are, in a sense, launching here this week together is already in the first 48 hours something that feels very different. And let me also point out one question that maybe the panelists might have an observation. Stockholm, 1972, look at which ministers came from which part of the world. Look at UNEA in 2014 and look at which countries are actually represented here at ministerial level. and which ones are absent. Interesting, interesting. Thank you.
Good point. Okay. We're going to have some closing remarks, and then it's cocktail time, folks. So, Nathan, you're the youngest, going on 16. You go first.
Trying to maybe cover a bit some of the points that have been raised in terms of the role of sports organizations, poverty, behavior, law, and building on what Mr. Steiner has said about this not being enough. And the question also that you asked previously about poverty eradication. Let's compare this to slavery. Poverty, like slavery, is a man-made problem, and it's a problem that we can solve. Slavery has been put into place through frameworks, through a system that has been created by humans and that can be deconstructed by humans as well. Right now, if we talk about slavery, it's something that we consider as unacceptable. And if we talk about environmental degradation, it's something that many people would consider more as an inconvenience rather than something as unacceptable. And this is the dialogue that we need to start using. It's the mindset that we need to use, that this is something that's unacceptable as well. And it's the issue is whether if we can move towards this and solve the issue. Looking at the climate process, many children, youth have been disillusioned and think that it's no longer worth it to engage with the UN system because there's not enough participation from civil society and the voices are not being listened to. There's maybe a risk that this transcends to UNEP as well. You may know that many of the youth here have decided to extend their tickets to stay on board for the UNEA. The expectations are rising, more youth are participating, so expectations are rising, and revolutions don't happen through poor people. Revolutions happen when expectations are rising and the system is unable to meet those expectations.
Great. Dr. Leisha. Dr. Leisha.
Okay. I think it's been an absolutely wonderful evening, and I've really enjoyed listening to all the comments and the feedback. And I think, and I echo here, Nathan, that it's when citizens start demanding action that action will follow. And therefore, I think what we really need to do is take home some very clear messages to governments that we need to look at the link between environmental and health and how that's affecting our well-being. And that will, really shake up people. And that's already happening when you hear about air quality. And the second is that development, if unsustainable, will really limit your possibilities in the future. So this short-term aspect of the kinds of development choices that we're having now are absolutely unacceptable. And this link between, or this understanding of the ecological basis of development, believe me, hasn't gone home, irrespective of the fact that we've been talking about this for years and years. So we need to do even more work on that. The third issue that I think is important is far more informal capacity building. And I think the lady there spoke about the need for having more access of ordinary citizens to being able to resolve issues. Many of them they can resolve better, and we have to have mechanisms by which those solutions, simple solutions, can come back and inform science. So we must do that, but we must also have something like science shops which enable the science to go out very easily to people. Now, how do we do that? UNEP Live, for example, is one of those instruments which is providing information, but we need to go much beyond that in terms of, in every country, setting up these science shops which enable people to have access to simple technological solutions to enable their lives to become better. I can go on, but you didn't give me time, so...
Time flies when you're having fun. Farooqullah.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you, Achim, for putting this together. I have to obviously say something about this point about winning and losing. It can't go unsaid. I agree there are very many successes, and we need to acknowledge and applaud those successes. Yes, there are principles, there's legislation, there are national parks, but I mean this at the macro level, and I don't mean us in this room, I mean all of humanity. On all the major trends for sustainable development, we are going in the wrong direction. Anthropogenic climate change and atmospheric carbon, we mentioned over there, we're heading towards the 6th great extinction of species. Inequalities gap is rising. The human rights are still being ignored. I mean, with all due respect, there are still 22 million people in the world living in slavery. 5 million people in Thailand alone work on slave ships so that we can have nice juicy prawns in the West. 22 million people is the size of a medium-sized country. That is bad. I mean, that is unfair. And I'll go back to my 4 points earlier, fairness. We cannot stand for these things. So on a macro scale, we are leaving the world in a less good place than when we inherited it. We are leaving an impoverished future for future generations, and that cannot be considered winning. But however, I think that we have many reasons for hope, and we have to be optimistic because we can identify them. We have successes. We need to build on them, as Achim says. We have to identify them, and the bright sparks that are out there, we have to scale them up and roll them out for complete coverage everywhere. That is the answer. And what is most encouraging is that for many of our problems, we already know the solution. We're just not yet doing it. So that gives us much hope for the future. And really, at the end of the day, it is very much exactly about that. It's capacity building, it's education for sustainable development. More people are aware of these issues than ever before. When I started working in sustainable development, I would go home and see my buddies in Alberta, which of course is one of the most unsustainable places in the world, and they didn't have a clue of what I was doing. Now they kind of get it. They even agree. They still work in the oil and gas industry, but that's their livelihood, and they're not going to be able to change that anytime soon. But the revolution is coming. We just have to hurry it along, because we are sitting on a social-ecological time bomb, as I've already said. And the last thing I have to say is stakeholder engagement is the answer. I'm convinced. And I'm not just saying that because I work for Stakeholder Forum and it's my job. I truly believe it. I truly believe that more inclusive, more thoroughly deliberated challenges will result in better, more informed, and more innovative outcomes. We have to ensure that we don't regress, as Dan says, on stakeholder participation in these absolutely essential multilateral fora. Multilateralism cannot be allowed to fail. It's the only chance we have to deal with the global challenges that we all face together commonly as humanity.
All right.
So, Jeff, I'm going to respect the 2 minutes that you whispered in my ear. 5 points. First of all, why don't we try now to change the way the UN system works, and let's have more of these dialogues in the so-called dialogues that have been happening in the UN for so many years. It's a great idea. And I didn't know what unplugged means, but now I do. So, second point, run for office, Farouk. All of us should run for office. Well, maybe he won't, but we run for office. Okay, yes, you can. Run for office. If you live in a country which allows you to run for office and make long-term commitments, not only for your time in office. On the youth statement, I mean, I hope you can get to make your statement, but if you don't, you can make it in many other ways than just getting up there and saying it. I have seen so many wonderful youth statements in my long time of going to international meetings. There was a very lovely young Canadian in Rio 20 years ago. I don't know what happened to her, but it was a wonderful statement. If you do make your statement, make sure that what you're suggesting is followed up. Don't just go home afterwards. Make sure it happens. Then the fourth one is, yes, tell the stories of things that work. Celebrate success, because there's plenty of it out there. But frankly, our media and many of us also think that it's more interesting to talk about things that don't work. So let's celebrate success and inspire others by it. And finally, the fifth and final point is, I think every single one of us has got to leave this room, this unplugged event, commit to change. There isn't changing our behavior. There isn't one of us in this room who is living within the planetary boundaries. And certainly our countries aren't, but even we aren't. So let's just commit to change and then make sure that we're changing others. And let's get to that movement, a revolution if you like. I'm very happy to participate. Let's get to that movement that really we need. Thank you very much.
Justice Antonio Benjamin.
Well, I think it's good that we have those 2 minutes to wrap up and make clear the points that we wanted, perhaps we didn't, to convey in the longer conversation. From my perspective, what I would like to convey is the fact that environmental protection is not just an issue in itself. This has become something that we all agree, but I want you to go 1 mile extra and to connect this with the rule of law. So no country that I am aware of that does not respect human rights will truly respect the rules that protect the environment. So if you know of any country like that, let me know. And I'll be delighted to mention this exception in the next talks that I give. So the rule of law in itself will not protect the environment. So we need to go the second extra mile, which is to call it the environmental rule of law. So we borrow from this concept that is 200 years old, and we try to use the legitimacy, but also the power of the term from the traditional area into the environmental arena. And finally, this is my final point, there cannot be true rule of law, true environmental rule of law, without an independent judiciary. So judges that are afraid of the government, the executive power or the legislative power, or are even afraid that they might not make home, that their family might be kidnapped or shoot. Again, here we are not going to have the real protection of the environment that we want and the planet and the future generations deserve. So again, the rule of law, environmental rule of law, and an independent judiciary that is able, at the end of the day, to make sure that this is delivered. Thank you.
Right. Please join me in thanking my very distinguished panel.